And tonight's presenter, Dr. Lisa Schirch, is a scholar practitioner focused on peace and peace building in the context of technology. When it comes to engaging with an unacceptable other, she has a PhD in that. She was a Fulbright Fellow in East and West Africa, and her 30-year career has included peace-building work stretching from Fiji to Afghanistan to Costa Rica. Dr. Schirch's research focuses on the links between technology, polarization, migration, climate, peace processes, and violent extremism. She has provided training to the US military, NATO, the World Bank, and the UN on the design of peace processes, systems approaches to violent extremism, conflict assessment, peace building, and human security. So perhaps she can help us out here in South Haven. Dr. Schirch is the Richard G. Starman Senior Professor of the Practice in Peace Studies at the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame. She is the author of 11 books, and her next one is focused on democracy and peace. Prior to her recent move to Notre Dame, Dr. Schirch taught for 25 years at Eastern Mennonite University's Center for Justice and Peacebuilding. She holds a PhD in conflict analysis and resolution from George Mason University's School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, now known as the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution. In addition to her role at the Kroc Institute, Dr. Schirch is also a senior research fellow for the Toda Peace Institute, where she directs the social media, technology, and peace-building program. So we are so very pleased to have her with us tonight in South Haven. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Julie, and to the board who brought me here. It's such an honor to be in South Haven. I told Julie when she asked me almost a year, not a year ago, but close to it, about coming here. I said, do you know how much I love South Haven? And I've been coming here for 30 years, and you live in paradise. So I'm envious of all of you who are sitting in the audience tonight that you have this beautiful place to live. And yet there are very few places in the United States where we are not suffering from polarization, from divisions, both in the digital space and in our real world with our real neighbors. And so I am here tonight to hopefully both shed light on the scale of the challenge before us of polarization, to explain a little bit why technology is making it worse than it needs to be, and then looking at how technology can also help us to build bridges. The main points there I just went over. So there's going to be 3 sections to my talk. So I'm going to start out just with the cold facts of what the Pew Trust, which is a very legitimate and credible survey program that does nonpartisan survey work, what they're coming out with in terms of how polarized Americans are. Before I get to that, I want to just explain what polarization is. It's a big word, and people use it in different ways. The way I'm using it, the way we use it at the United Nations, actually, to talk about polarization in different countries, is sort of an individual, a horizontal, and a vertical dimension. So individually, we feel like we lack agency, like the world is so chaotic, so many things happening. We feel disempowered, we feel isolated, frustrated. Polarization does that to us. Polarization also is this sense that we are broken relationships with the people who are our fellow citizens. we feel either excluded or we behave with contempt and distrust toward other people. And then the third dimension is that vertical. So not only contempt with our neighbors, but also with the institutions and the leaders of our country, of our state. And we often think when there's polarization that they're not acting on behalf of our best interests. So polarization has three dimensions that we'll talk a little bit about later in the talk when I get to how technology can address each of those. Growing shares of both Republicans and Democrats say members of the other party are immoral, dishonest, and closed-minded, more than other Americans, specifically those in their own party. And you can see the discrepancy there, but it's increasing between 2016 and 22. So the problem has gotten significantly worse over the last 6 years, where an increasing number of Democrats and Republicans think of others in the other party as all of these things. The only one where there's a real discrepancy is on lazy, as you can see. Over the past several decades, Americans express unfavorable opinions of both parties. So not only are we more divided, but we're also discontent with our own political parties. And we often don't feel fully represented by those in power who we elect. So 4 in 10 Americans have a very or somewhat favorable view of the Democratic Party. Even fewer have a favorable impression of the Republican Party. So both Democrats and Republicans, we have something in common. We are frustrated with our parties. Among the public overall, 39% say that I often wish there were more political parties to choose from. So we're looking for alternatives. So while there's polarization there, hidden in some of these surveys is actually the code of how we move forward. Unfortunately, these deeply negative views of the opposing party are far more widespread. So I talked about 2016 to 2020, 2022, but if you look back even further to 1994, there were sizable, but still under 25% of the party thought that the other side was very unfavorable, where that has grown to over 50% now. Part of the pattern of polarization in the United States and in other countries is when political beliefs become layered on top of other identities that we have. So we call that being stacked. So political party is stacked in terms of where you live in the country, your religion, and not just Christianity, but the many different branches of Christianity, for example. Your race, your age, your gender, your level of education. These are not obviously firm, but they are weighted in terms of political party. The Pew Research Center has provided all of these facts. I want to make that very clear. It's on every slide. If you want to read more of their survey methodology or look into their surveys, I recommend them. They come out very regularly. These are just from several months ago, so they're fairly fresh. But they're really finding out over time that trust in institutions has declined. That's the vertical level of polarization. Cynicism of government has risen. Citizens are becoming their own information curators. That means we're finding our own information, and that's shaping what we believe. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Especially here, Americans are lacking trust in how our fellow citizens are finding their information, and that has a lot to do with technology. About 60% of adults now say they have little or no confidence in the wisdom of the American people when it comes to making political decisions. So we don't trust each other. We don't think each other is smart enough, is critical enough to be able to look at news sources and to find. And that's both parties. It's not one, it's both. So this sort of lack of common facts and common information that we can agree on is driving the polarization between us, because we look to different media sources, both online and offline. So we not only disagree in some cases over plans or policies, but we can't agree on the basic facts. So it's getting more difficult to solve problems when we don't have those common facts. About 2/3 of Americans think made-up news and altered videos create a great deal of confusion about the facts of current issues. Again, what's interesting here is even in the analysis of the polarization, we're all similarly frustrated. So 2/3 of us are frustrated with what is happening on social media. And I spend all of my time now trying to figure out how are we going to figure out this social media space, because it's relatively new. Only 20 years has Facebook been around, and it's dramatically changing the way we see our neighbors. So I'm going to turn now to thinking about how social media is really affecting polarization. 64% of Americans say it's having a mostly negative effect on the way things are going. 55% report that they're getting their news from social media. 2/3 say social media companies have too much control over the mix of news that people see. And an overwhelming majority, 83%, say it's one-sided and inaccurate news is a very big or moderately big problem. So I've established polarization is increasing and social media technology is playing a role in that polarization. I want to spend a little bit of time explaining how social media works and why it's responsible for some of this polarization. This is a diagram from my last book, which I brought copies tonight in case anybody is interested. Just trying to explain to my students at Notre Dame and the public, sort of how legacy media, which is like traditional news media, worked compared with social media companies. Traditional media worked where you had journalists write stories. There were what we called gatekeepers, who were the media owners that had influence over news editors, and those editors would select stories, and it would control the flow of information to the public. There were some real problems with this because many stories wouldn't get through, and so there's problems in legacy media, traditional media, that needed to be addressed. The good thing about legacy media or traditional media is that the threat of lawsuits forced news media to correct information that was false, because if they would post something or if they would have it in a newspaper or TV or radio, if they would say something false on the air, they could be sued if it was false and it was defamatory against somebody. So there were news regulation laws that made those news editors accountable to the truth. What we have now in social media is that there's no legal binding for what's on social media to be true. Nobody can be sued because of the laws of the land at this point. So there's no legal framework that would allow somebody to sue somebody else or to sue Facebook or Twitter or any of the big technology companies for publishing something that's false. The model in social media is that anybody in the world can say anything they want on social media to anybody else. So there's no more gatekeepers, but that means that there's no editors who feel responsible for checking sources, verifying information, taking down information that's false. And that's where we're at right now with the big tech companies realizing they're in a real problem because there's a lot of false information on social media. Everybody agrees about that on all sides of the aisle, but nobody can figure out, should it be the government? Should it be the social media companies? How do we figure out a mechanism that we did in traditional media for not allowing false and defamatory information or hateful information? So there's no fact checking. And these 12 boxes here are 12 ways I describe how social media is different than traditional media. The speed of it, so somebody can on election night make up something, it can go out and it can distort the entire election. So the speed of it is unlike traditional media. The scale of it, so something can go viral and reach millions of people. The scope and the searchability, secrecy, I'm not going to go into all of these tonight because it gets very academic, and I want to give you the idea that it's distinct, it operates in a distinct way. I want to highlight the fact that it's simple to use and the sticker price, so it's free. It's basically free for us to post anything we want on social media. The cost of publishing has dropped dramatically. So this has given everyone in the world a voice, and that has benefits and costs. And as a society, we only have 20 years of experience trying to figure out this new communication platform and how we're going to make this work to amplify the good parts of it and to try to restrict the more harmful parts. A book that I found particularly helpful is called Lie Machines. It's by the University of Oxford, Philip Howard, and it contains this study from MIT, and they've replicated it now several times, that false information spreads 6 times as fast as true information on social media. So, before the truth gets out the door, they say lies have circled the world twice. And on social media, it's really easy for a lie to circle the world twice. So we're dealing with the scale of a problem that nobody anticipated and no one is fully prepared to address, whether it's the tech companies or our governments or the local communities who are on the front lines of feeling the polarization that is a result of some of the lies. So I want to talk about how we each see different screens now. So partly we're polarized because we're getting this different information and we no longer have this shared reality. With traditional media, we turned on the news. I remember when I grew up, and basically the whole country is watching the same basic news. And there's a shared reality. We're all looking at the same screen, and we're deciding for ourselves who we believe, where our political opinions are. But now the internet provides individual screens. And it's not just that the kids are sitting at different computers, but there are algorithms, mathematical formulations that are tied to each one of us and our history of logging into the internet. And so what I see on Facebook and what my mother or father sees on Facebook is completely different. If I search on Google, what is China doing in the world today, and my mother types that in, we'll get different news sources that will pop up. So no two people in the world have the same profile online. The algorithms are feeding us what they think we want to see because the algorithms are designed to keep us there longer. Let me explain that. Before I get to that, what's basically happening is we're all seeing different information. People are calling it the collapse of truth or epistemic insecurity, which means actually we're feeling more disempowered, which is that element of polarization, because information is chaotic. We don't know what is true anymore, and it's very difficult to make decisions about what to do or who to vote for when we don't know what's true. So it's actually limiting our individual agency and empowerment, our freedoms. Let me go back to algorithms. So algorithms generate on any platform. So it could be YouTube, it could be Twitter. Don't just want to pick on Facebook, but it's basically all of these big tech platforms have algorithms that choose what we will see. And they're all trying to keep us on our devices longer. And they're doing that so that they can get more information about what we like, what our personality is, who we are, Basically these tech companies have more information on us than any government will have on you. So they know where you live, who your friends are, what your religion is, where you shop. They're collecting huge data banks of information about us. It's not necessarily for nefarious purposes, but it can be sold to governments for nefarious purposes. And that's another part of the world if we were talking about China or India. The idea of how social media companies make money is they want to grab our attention so that we will see ads on their platform. So partly, we pay for Facebook by watching the ads that comes on our Facebook page or on YouTube. There's always, some commercials at the beginning that we have to sit through. But they're also making money on us by collecting our information, which then they sell to advertisers, both political advertisers and business advertisers. So they're collecting all this information about us so that they can target ads specifically to us. Now, this is a subject of a lot of conversation, especially out in Silicon Valley in San Francisco, where this profit model was designed. Because they're making billions out of this profit model of collecting our private information and then selling it to advertisers, political advertisers and public advertisers. So they're collecting everything about our identity, what we like. Every time we push the like button or share button, that's being captured and into what they call a psychometric profile of each one of us. All of our comments and other posts, like this huge amount of information is being stored. This cartoon is the subject of critique, but it's also kind of capturing the basic idea that none of us we feel like we're getting services for free, just like the pigs think that they're being fed for free in the barn, but actually we're the product. So it's actually Apple, which is the tech company CEO, Tim Cook, said, if you're not the product, if you're not the customer, you're the product being sold. So on social media, it's our information that's being sold. So we're the product, actually. We're not the customer. If we're buying a computer, we're paying money to get the computer, and then it's ours. They're not collecting our private information and stuff. But on social media sites, as well as on Google or search engines, we pay for these services with our private information, which we give over by searching their sites, and with our attention to watch their models. So an analogy would be, if there's a fast food restaurant and they're sort of collecting our private information and giving us free burgers. So, this is a very different economic model, a very different profit model than we're used to. And I think the public really needs to know that this is what's happening sort of behind the curtain. How this is impacting polarization is those companies, because their profit model is tied to how long we stay on their sites, they have found that the most extremist content keeps us there longer. The most polarized content keeps us there longer. It's not unlike when we're driving on the highway and there's an accident and we all slow down and look, right? Because there's a tragedy, right? In journalism, they say, if it bleeds, it leads. So if there's been a tragedy, it's the front page of the story. So it's the same thing. The human mind is attracted to tragedy, to polarization, to extremism. We want to look at it and understand it. If somebody makes an outrageous claim, we'll spend longer on that post. That translates into more money for the company. And so this dynamic of the profit model is actually fueling polarization because the algorithm is showing more of this extremist content from our own party, usually. So, as whatever our political affiliation is, it's going to be showing you the most kind of outrageous claims or extremist claims within that paradigm. And that's why it's taking people sort of away from the middle and more towards the wings. So false and inflammatory posts garner the most attention. And so the algorithms just keep kicking it up to more and more extremist content. So this, the recommendation systems within Facebook, within YouTube, within Netflix even, they're also sort of drifting us. So they're focusing our attention. Their algorithms are driving where we watch. Another element of this is the neuroscience or psychology of what's on social media. And that's why we sort of, look at what is happening to people's brains, and especially children's brains, as they start scrolling on Instagram and they see skinnier and skinnier models, which I think is a form of extremism. And they're, they're posing, themselves, and they're trying to get an affirmation click, somebody liking their photo. And this dopamine is a chemical in our brain that, gives us a little burst of joy, a little bit of satisfaction when we see somebody liking a post that we've posted. So it's happening for old men, for young women, for boys, for people of all ages and genders. They're sort of like, we all get hooked into this affirmation addiction. So it's also keeping us on longer. And we realize that when we post extremist or outrageous information, we share a story, maybe without reading it, that we're not sure if it's true or not, but we wonder, so we share it. We get a lot of clicks, and then sort of we are part of the extremist algorithm of we've just generated more extremist content. So that there's this dynamic of affirmation addiction. Another scary element is that around the world, states are creating armies, cyber armies, or troll armies of people that are posting false and inflammatory information in, sort of widespread propaganda. NATO is calling it cognitive warfare because it's trying to get into societies to divide them. So it's realizing, like that very old art of war saying, divide and conquer. It's easier to conquer a country when they are polarized, when people are divided, when they have turned on each other, rather than looking as a united country. So polarization is dangerous, and it's being used against us. In the United States, we already have divisions. We know them, they're long-standing, and other countries are now shooting Facebook posts at us that are aimed to divide us. There has been a lot of research on this. These are just a few of the countries around the world that have troll armies that are spitting polarizing information at us, designed to undermine our own democracy and our own ability to solve problems. We know that the US Senate, a bipartisan committee of Republicans and Democrats, found that Russia used Facebook extensively to divide people, both within the Republican Party. So they were trying to discourage some people from voting for some Republican candidates and for others, and within the Democratic Party the same way. They were dividing people within parties and against each other. And there are many, many stories now of how they have used memes and Facebook posts pretending to be Americans themselves and creating false information that turned us against each other. All right, so I've hit the second point there, and now let me turn to the more hopeful story of how technology can also help us to depolarize and make decisions together that is in all of our best interests in terms of the future of our country. I'm just going to be showing you some different technology platforms and then reflecting on how they can help us depolarize. This is a group you can see up there on the left-hand part of the screen, a group called More in Common. They operate in the US and other countries, and they really try to emphasize we have more in common than we have different. We share many values, we share many beliefs about how our country should be run. We have many concerns that are the same about our children and our roads and our healthcare system and our education system. They developed this online quiz called Perception Gap, which is for people across the political spectrum to test the reality of how well do you actually understand the other party or people of the other party. So technology can help us reality check to determine if we really disagree as much as we think we do. A survey exit poll, from many people taking this quiz, 55% of the estimated proportion of Republicans and Democrats hold extreme views when actually it's 30% of each party. That's still a lot, but it's not as bad as we think it is in terms of how extreme people are within political parties. The second way technology helps us to build trust with each other is what we call the sharing economy. So there are platforms now that allow us to rent out our homes and to take other people that we don't know in our cars. This is called the sharing economy, which is Uber, it's Lyft, it's Airbnb. All of these platforms basically do background checks on other people for us, just like the police used to do. But it gives us some insurance that if we open up our home to somebody else, we can see, whether they have damaged somebody else's home, whether they have violated something. It enables us to trust strangers. And it actually brings Americans together in the same car, regardless of their political party. And so these kinds of technology are enabling us to trust each other, at least for some things. The online dispute resolution system that was developed by eBay, actually decades ago, is actually now really advancing. So eBay was so good at building a system where people could trust each other to sell used things to each other. A used camera, for example, and if you got it in the mail and it didn't work, you could go onto eBay's site and go through this dispute resolution center so that you could find a way of working it out with that person. And they have solved millions of disputes through this sort of very organized, automated mediation online. What this is being scaled to now, basically all over the world, are court systems that are using online mediation. And what they're finding is actually robot mediators have a better success rate than in-person mediators. Now, I know Julie and I are both court mediators, or we have been, so it's kind of, maybe threatening our livelihood, but it's great, actually, that computers are so good at really coaching people on how to be good to each other, how to be honest with each other, and how to repair harm if you get a damaged good. Another way that technology is helping us. There are a variety of different, what we call chat bots. These are, you can go to the New York Times and type in angry uncle chatbot, and you can have a conversation with a robot about any political topic. And if you get to choose whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, and you talk to your angry uncle of the other political party. And it coaches you into what kind of communication tactics might be effective with your angry uncle of the other political party. So there's these basically communication coaches that exist now to help us have the hard conversations practicing first, so that when we get to Thanksgiving dinner and we're actually having the hard conversation, we're maybe a little more prepared. Finally, this is the last slide, or the last couple of slides. Technology can support what we're calling digital citizen assemblies, where people can find creative solutions to polarized issues. And this set of technology is the one that I'm actually most excited about, because I do think it could change the way American democracy works, and it could change how social media works. There's this platform called Polis, Greek word, about public discourse. And it enables large numbers of people, thousands of people, to get on the platform. Nobody responds to each other, but they respond to some guiding question. And the guiding question invites people to be, sort of thoughtful, to reading how other people think about the issues, and you can vote up or down on somebody's issue, or you can enter in a new idea to be considered by others to vote up or down. And what this technology does is it prevents people from getting personal and attacking each other, because it's not even an option. There's no way for people to have like an individual attack. What you start seeing is people are listening to each other at scale and realizing, okay, there's really valid points across the political spectrum. I agree with some of them, I disagree with some of them, and the crowd of thousands of people moves closer and closer together as they start realizing where they have common ground and where they could move ahead on a policy solution to some problem that everybody is feeling. It's been used now in Taiwan over 30 times, and it's reached legislation. So it's taken very polarized issue in the country of Taiwan, and it's enabled people to make decisions to each other. Now, we know our Congress is barely able to function at this point, and this is a symptom of polarization, is that we can't reach policy solutions even when there's a dire need for action, for political action. So we need ways of finding our common ground and figuring out what is actionable, where there is public support behind it. This is the kind of technology that can do that. And I want to say one more thing, is that in the country of Libya, which has been going through a peace process, there is another technology platform very similar called Remesh, which is basically doing the same thing. And I think we need to be using these platforms basically in every community in the United States to figure out what we're going to teach in our schools about American history, because we're very polarized as a country about how American history is being taught. We have, polarization on healthcare. We could be using these kinds of platforms to have community discussions and to really bring people together to see, where do we have enough common ground that we can find at least some policy solution that we can all agree on. And what we know from the field of peace building is, once you have solved some problems together, you increase trust. So you increase your ability to realize that, yes, I disagree with my neighbor on some issues, but we also share a lot in common. And if we love our country, we are all going to have to figure out ways of making decisions that get a little bit of what we want, and also recognize that there's things that our neighbors want that we need to give them.
Okay, I was wondering, the wonderful politicians have talked about regulating social media, and I'm sure they do a great job. I guess I wonder what your thoughts would be on regulation that might be meaningful and actually have a positive impact on social media.
Great question. This is a very thorny question also because it's very polarized. Recent polls, and I meant to include that in the slide, show that Republicans want less regulation of social media and Democrats want more. And I was just actually out at Stanford University. They had a big conference on content moderation. So Facebook, Meta, all of these big tech companies are trying to figure out what do they do with information that's false or hateful. And it's really dividing the public even more on how to go about doing that. Should we turn that power over to tech companies or to governments? I actually think that this some of this new technology, we need more citizen panels with people from across the political aisle sitting down together and looking at some of this content together and trying to figure out how to do this as well. So I look at a multi-stakeholder solution. I do think government regulation is necessary because there are lies that have caused genocides in Myanmar. So in the country of Myanmar, the military used Facebook to publish awful things about the minority Rohingya community, and it led to a genocide against them because of lies on Facebook. So I don't think we can just let this kind of content exist, but we have to be very careful for free speech rules and for not squashing the right of people to protest and to air grievances. And so, I think we need to be using all the technology that we have to be able to listen to each other at scale on the concerns, figuring out really a new code of free speech, and a new way of thinking about the powers of technology companies, the powers of the government, and what powers are citizens going to have in being able to participate in that as well.
We used to have the fairness doctrine. I don't really know much about it. We had it, we lost it.
Right.
Is there anything in that vein that could apply here?
So this is a lot of the policy discussion in Washington, D.C. I just am back from Washington on Monday, Tuesday this week. And the fairness doctrine, also required legacy media, traditional media, to also give balanced points of view. And this ended, and that's when we saw MSNBC and Fox News and really, the polarization of our television as well as what's happening online. I think that state-run media can be great and it can be terrible. And so there are very smart people working on that problem. It's not one that I've spent a lot of time looking at, so I'm not really in the weeds, but I do think that we all need to be looking at some of the same shared facts. And when we're seeing completely different facts on television, in our newspapers, and online, this isn't good for us. And so I think the fairness doctrine was designed, by very smart political leaders decades ago. And when it ended, our country took a turn for the worse by not ensuring that fairness. Thank you.
A two-part question. What differences do you see in polarization, the magnitude of polarization in your college students that you see versus all these polarized gray-haired people here? And also, what advice do you have to parents and grandparents as we raise the next generation? How do we raise them to be less polarized?
Thank you. That's a great question, and I don't have those facts in my mind, what the difference is in polarization between the college age or younger population and the older. So I don't want to take any guesses without knowing. But advice for grandparents, because I have 2 children and I give them advice on listening to people and trying to find the common ground and always remembering the dignity of other human beings, never, trying to take an unhealthy stab in the back or try to be underhanded in terms of criticizing them and dehumanizing them. I think we all need to treat each other as human beings and remember that actually all of us have values and ethics that we're following. Sometimes we prioritize them differently between fairness or loyalty. There's been some really interesting research on how people across the aisle all share 6 basic values, but prioritize them differently. And there's trade-offs, right? So sometimes being loyal to somebody doesn't mean being fair to them, and vice versa. And I think to help our children understand that the experiences we've had in life are shaping how we make those ethical decisions.
I want to piggyback off the first question and the idea of using polis and citizen groups. We have the Republicans, we have the Democrats, but we have, I think, a very large group of independents. How do they play into this thing, and how would you include those?
So I think actually some of the research from the Pew Trust Fund is really looking at there's a lot of people who would they may feel like they belong to one of the parties, but they have an independent streak. They're also really listening and critiquing their own party. And so this is where some of the new technology on ranked voting comes in, because if as we see, many Democrats and Republicans wish there was another political option, we don't really like either party, but actually third-party candidates, in the current system are not an option for many of us, because then, if we vote for a third-party candidate, then it swings the other side. What ranked voting does is you vote for maybe your first, second, and your third choice. And so if your first choice, which is the third-party candidate, doesn't get it, those votes, you could tell them where you want your vote to go. This would enable, for example, within the Republican Party or within the Democratic Party, for a much more nuanced conversation about where do most people in the party actually want to be. Because the winner-take-all system, there's a lot of people that are frustrated with it in both parties right now. And so this would, if we could pass some legislation, other countries have already done it, ranked voting, so that it's more people get to have more of a say in who represents them.
How about the legal ramifications of who owns our data?
Yes, they really should be paying each one of us. There are economists who've figured out, the longer you spend on Facebook, the more money you should be making from the Facebook paycheck every year because you've watched ads. So not all the ad money should be going to them, but you should be, profiting from this model too. I'm not sure if that's ever going to happen. The dangers of all this surveillance, we live in one of the freest countries in the world, and we're very lucky that most of us don't have to worry about police raiding our homes at night for our political opinions and dragging us off. But in many other countries around the world, that is the case. And the danger of Facebook having all this information is that governments make requests to Facebook to get access to information. They do it a lot in India. They do it a lot in other countries that don't have the same civil rights laws that we do, don't have the same protections for citizens. The people who are being dragged away in the middle of the night in Egypt are not terrorists. They're human rights activists. They're democracy activists who are trying to have democracy in Egypt instead of an authoritarian, autocratic system. And so when Facebook has information and the Egyptian government is asking Facebook to identify who is watching these pages, this is very dangerous for people. And it's why in many countries around the world, social media has been a death sentence for people working for democracy and human rights because they can be tracked down on social media unless they have a lot of protections on all of their accounts. We can say, well, we don't mind being surveilled. We don't mind seeing the ads that Facebook feeds us. I said that for many years. When we think about the larger picture of what's happening and where we don't know where our country is going to go in terms of authoritarianism and autocratic leadership, to think that all this information is sitting somewhere and governments might be able to buy access to it is a scary prospect for all of us, I think. So,
how do we make Polis popular?
Thank you. I'm having a big conference in February. I was just reserving the big space on San Francisco Bay where we're going to invite Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook to come listen to the story of how Polis was used. So the digital minister from Taiwan hopefully will be there, and the creators of Polis who have trained in conflict resolution. So they designed this to really help conflicts be resolved and to depolarize communities. The big tech companies don't know about it yet. So it's a small-scale case study in Taiwan. It was used a little bit in the UK. I want to take it bigger. I want more of us to be using Polis in our communities. At Notre Dame, we're talking about how do we offer courses for community leaders to be able to use Polis. It does require some technological skills, so it's not an easy-to-use platform. It needs more investors to make it the front end of it easier to use for people. But that's really where I'm devoting my time now, because I think we need technology to help us solve problems and to trust each other and to listen to each other. So I think there's a lot of hope in some of these new technologies, and I'm trying to organize a big event in February in San Francisco where the big tech companies can come hear the same story from the actual people who've run this massive nationwide experiment, and be inspired that technology doesn't have to always divide us. It can bring us together. Thank you.